For as long as there have been societies, there have been laws. For as long as there have been laws, there have been criminals. And for as long as there have been criminals, there have been methods of punishment. For particularly terrible crimes, or for particularly unlucky criminals, governments throughout history have used execution as a punishment. The methods of execution have varied greatly in complexity and cruelty. However, there are some truly ghastly methods of executing criminals that stand out from the rest, that many people have no idea ever existed. Consider this your warning. This video is not for the faint of heart. We are going over 4 methods of execution throughout history you probably didn't know about. The Persian Empire existed from 559 to 331 BC and gave the world many useful things, such as the game of polo, algebra, and rather ironically, considering what we're talking about, the first declaration of human rights. Unfortunately for those who planned on breaking laws in Persia, the empire also invented a terrible form of execution known as Scaphism, or the boats. To perform this type of execution, the victim was brought out to a lake or swamp and tied to the space between 2 small boats or hollowed-out logs. The victim would be tied in such a way that their head, hands and feet would stick out of the boats and be exposed to the sun. The executioner would then proceed to force-feed the victim a combination of milk and honey, making sure to smear it all over the victim's exposed skin as well. This sweet mixture would attract all types of vermin in the area to the victim. As the rodents and flies began to eat the sweet mixture of honey and milk, they also began to eat the victim alive. This was no quick process, and it only got worse from there. Because the victim was force-fed a diet of exclusively honey and milk, they soon began to experience extreme diarrhea. This made the poor soul trapped in the boats weak and dehydrated. However, the person would not die from this. Each day the executioners would come back and feed the victim more of the sweet, sticky mixture, ensuring that the tortured person would not starve to death. Slowly, over the course of days or even weeks, the boats would fill with feces as the torture went on. As the filth grew, it attracted maggots and pests that would begin to multiply and spread into the body of the person trapped within the boats. Finally, the victim would be put out of their misery slowly and terribly, as the maggots ate them alive from the inside out. If you read Edgar Allan Poe's famous tale, The Cask of Amontillado, you will recognize our next form of execution. Immurement was a form of execution that was also known as live entombment, where the victim was sealed in a confined space with no way in or out. They were left there to slowly die of dehydration, their remains forever sealed away. This ghastly form of execution was widespread, with various cultures across the world using it at different times and for different reasons. One of the earliest recorded uses of live entombment was as a punishment for a specific type of Roman priestess. The Vestal Virgins were a group of priestesses who had taken vows of chastity and committed themselves to watch over the sacred flame of Vesta, the goddess of the hearth. It was forbidden for the blood of the Vestal Virgins to be spilled, so when one of them broke their vows, the Romans had to turn to a creatively grim solution. If a Vestal Virgin was found to have broken her vow of chastity, she would be brought to a prepared room underground that contained a table and a little food. There she was entombed until she passed of a natural death. Immurement was also used for a darker purpose, if you can believe that. Human sacrifice by way of live entombment was found to have been carried out in areas once controlled by the Inca Empire. Archaeological digs have found 3 young children who were believed to have been sacrificed in this way. It is believed that these 3 individuals were selected a year before they were killed and fed a rather luxurious diet until their deaths. When it was time for their sacrifice, they were given alcohol and entombed near a volcano where they were left to die. Rats have never exactly been friends with humans. They have been pests for about as long as humans have been around. They eat our food, chew through our wires, and even sometimes spread a plague that kills 1 to 3 of all people on Earth. However, rats have also been used to torture and execute people. Rat torture has been around for a long time, with one of the first examples coming from ancient Rome. It is said that the cruel Emperor Nero, in tune with many of his other sadistic activities, would use rats to torture criminals. He would starve rats inside of barrels and lower prisoners into these barrels, who would begin to eat the poor soul who had crossed the violent emperor. Rat torture continued to be used during much of the Middle Ages by various groups around the world. However, the most gruesome case of people being tortured with rodents comes from the Dutch revolt in the 16th and 17th centuries. As the Dutch were trying to gain independence from their Spanish rulers, there were times when they needed to get information out of their prisoners. Rat torture was one of the ways confessions and information were forced out of prisoners. The Dutch would take their prisoner and strap them to the table. They would then take a cage that had one side of it removed and put it, open side down, onto the victim's abdomen. The torturers would then put rats in the cage. According to some, this would be enough to get the victim to give up any information they had, because they knew what was coming next and would do anything to avoid their fate. If captives decided to continue, a hot coal was taken from a fire and placed on top of the cage. This would cause the cage to begin to warm. As the temperature increased, the rats inside the cage would panic and try to get away. When the bars of the cage proved impossible to get through, the rodents would turn to the soft, fleshy floor upon which they stood. The rats would claw and chew straight into the bowels of the victim trying to get away. This would cause incredible pain and damage as the rodents tore up their victim from the inside. It is understandable why many of the prisoners gave up their information before being subjected to this fate. The next method of execution has popped up a few times throughout history, but can also trace its origin back to Rome. It is called Poena Cullei, loosely translated from Latin as punishment of the sack. This form of execution was reserved for those who committed one of the most heinous acts in Roman society, killing one's parents, also known as parricide. For Poena Cullei, the victim was tied and placed into a sack with a dog, a chicken, a viper, and an ape. The sack is then dragged to the nearest sea or river, and the whole thing is tossed in. This strange method of execution must have been terrifying for the recipient, whether they were killed by the viper's bite, bludgeoned by the ape, or survived long enough to simply drown. The last moments of the criminal's life would have been horrific. What other methods of execution would you hate to experience? Let us know in the comments below. We will be actively responding to every one of them. If you enjoyed this video, we would love it if you gave it a thumbs up and subscribed. Thanks for watching, and we hope you click back soon.